What you saw just there was me destroying a whole week's worth of work. Over the last 7 days, I've been building and testing a bunch of creations. Creations that are usually made of metal, but this time I wanted to see if wood would hold up just as well. Why? Because I love wood. Wait, I like that. What I mean is I love woodworking. Although not very good at it, I still love to do it. This is a throwing star, and the reason it works so well is because it's made of metal and it's sharp. So the first thing I tested is if wooden ones would work. But before I throw them, I need to show you how I made them. First I started off by getting a piece of wood and tracing out 2 different star shapes. Throwing stars come in a large range of shapes and sizes. Now before cutting them out, I did just want to remove the circular pieces in between each arm with a drill, because this is the easiest way to do it and it'll just save me a headache later on. I did the same on the other star before adding one last hole, and that's a hole in the middle. Why throwing stars have this hole, I have no idea. There's probably something to do with aerodynamics, I'm not a scientist, but all of my other throwing stars have it, so I added it. Anyway, cutting out the star was pretty straightforward. Using my jigsaw, I cut it out with no issues. It was all just straight lines. But then I realized a pretty big problem. This wood is really thick, and a throwing star is quite thin. Whether or not this will make a difference, I don't know. Now because I didn't want to waste the wood, I still cut out the other star and I'm going to keep them. I'll run a test later and see if the thicker ones hold up better. Anyway, luckily I had this thinner piece of wood lying around, and I traced down 2 more stars. But unfortunately, the big star was too big and I could only trace down the 4-pointed star. Using the magic of editing, by waving this stick, they were all cut out and all of them were now ready for the final step. And that was to sharpen them. But just before I sharpen them, this is the difference in thickness. Anyway, I need to sharpen these. Although they are a little sharp, I need each arm to have a point. To do this, I use my grinder with a sanding disc on it. The tips need to be sharp, but I have to be careful not to sand too far and make them weak and frail. I need them to hold up when I throw them, or at least hold up as best they can, because they're just wood. I took extra care when sanding the big one, as the arms are a little bit thinner and I didn't want them to snap. Although in saying that, the whole star is thicker, so hopefully they'll keep it together more. Who knows, maybe that was a happy accident how thick they were. But just before throwing them, I'm going to cover them in varnish. This is hopeful thinking. If they survive being thrown, I can display them on my weapon stand. Anyway, I had to let the varnish rest for 24 hours. Now the board I normally throw stuff at is made of cork, and there is no way the wooden ones are going to go into it. So to test these, I'm going to use cardboard. But before I throw them, here they are. They feel pretty sturdy and I'm quite surprised of how sharp they got. But enough talking, it's time to throw them. And they bounce right off. I tried setting up the box a little differently in hopes that it would make a difference, but it did not. They may not have gone into the target, but they did hold up. Most of the arms are still sharp and there was little to no chipping. On the bigger star, however, there was more chipping, but it still held up very well. I think we'll stick with metal stars for now. Moving on to something a little bit more dangerous, nunchucks. You might be thinking they already come in wood, and you'd be right, but the wooden ones still have a rope or chain connecting them, and I want to make it 100% out of wood. That means the chain included. Here are the chucks. There are some chain links that'll be used to connect the chucks later on. So I decided to start with the easier thing, and that's the chucks themselves. Using my jigsaw, I carefully cut out the first one, leaving an extra thick piece at the end that'll be used later on. That part's going to be very important. Anyway, once the first one was done, I grabbed the second piece of wood and did the same thing, repeating the process, and now both sides were cut out and we can move on to rounding them. Once again, I grabbed my grinder with a sanding disc and started rounding the edges of the chucks. It actually wasn't too difficult, definitely one of the smoother steps, though I will admit the second chuck came out a lot better than the first. I also tried to shape the extra bit on the end to make it flow nicely into the handle, but honestly I wasn't too happy with how it turned out. Still, with both chucks shaped and sanded, it was time to move on to the hardest part of this whole video, and that would be the chain. Now luckily, before I cut out the links, I realized a smarter way of drawing them. By having each link face the same direction, I could speed up the process and save myself a lot of time. I carefully cut out each link, trying my hardest to round the edges and remove as much from the sides as possible, but even after that, I went back and rounded it more. That left just the center to deal with, and that is where things got tricky. I needed a way of removing the middle of each link without breaking it. First I tried to use a large drill piece, but that just split the wood. Thinking it was a one-off, I tried again, but got the same result, more split wood. Then I tried a smaller drill piece, thinking if I drill enough holes it would just fall out, but it didn't really work. So I needed to find something else, but I wanted to take a break first. I did have some links I needed to replace. To replace them, I simply just got the other links and cut them in half because they were too thick anyway. So I started cutting them out. Probably not in the safest way possible, but that's okay. But while I was doing that, it gave me a brilliant idea. I went back and grabbed the cut-offs from the chucks earlier. Since they were already pretty thin, they were perfect for the new links. Well, almost. I had to make them a tiny bit thinner. So I gave them a quick sand down before tracing the new links onto the wood. This time, instead of drilling into the center to cut it out, I'm going to use my jigsaw. I made a bunch of small cuts into the center until I could snap out the pieces and repeated the process until every link was done. I had to be careful here, as if I accidentally went too far I'd cut the chain in half and have to restart. Taking a lot of care, I got them done, before cutting the link off and moving on to the next one. The new links were almost at the same stage as the old ones, as the outside just needed to be sanded away and making them smooth. Once again, grabbing my grinder, I quickly did that. It was quite a boring task, as it was just rinse and repeat over and over again for each link. But the job wasn't finished. The edges were still very rough, and they wouldn't be able to move freely when the chain is actually complete, so I had to grab sandpaper and do each one by hand until they were smooth. I couldn't use the grinder as I was afraid it was going to snap the pieces, and also each piece just needs to be done a little bit, so hand sanding was the go. But I noticed the links were still a little too thick in some places, so I marked off where I needed to trim and gave them a cut. This was the first time I could really see the chain coming together. It felt like it needed one more chain, so I quickly made 2 more links and added it to the chain. I didn't realize it at the time, but when I made the 2 extra links, it was actually done on a thinner piece of wood. Now, because I spent so much time making this chain, I wanted it to be perfect. So the only thing I thought of was to make all links thinner. I thought this would make it flow better when it was all done anyway. But that may have been the wrong decision, but it's too late now and we're just going to have to roll with it. Since these new links are a lot smaller than the old ones, we can finally make a much needed adjustment to the chucks. Originally, I left this extra bit of wood at the ends of the chucks so the chain can connect to it. But since the smaller chain fits without it, that extra bit isn't needed anymore, so I quickly trimmed it off and now the chucks look way better. It's finally time to connect all the links together. To do this, I'll be using glue, and okay, I might have lied a little bit when I said it will be 100% wood. I'll actually be using this metal rod to make tiny little pegs to join the links. I wanted to use wooden pegs, but because of how small the links are, I couldn't find wood thin enough, so metal it is. Before drilling into the actual chain, I tested everything on a scrap piece of wood. Once I figured out the right size, I carefully drilled holes into each link and lined it up with the next. This is what the chain will look like once it's all pieced together. I also left 2 links to the side. Those will be used to connect the chucks to the chain. At this point, the chucks were almost done. I just needed to glue them all together using PVA wood glue. This part was really satisfying. I finally got to see the whole build coming together. Hopefully the glue and pegs will actually hold. Hopefully. Not gonna lie, I don't have a lot of faith in this at all. If you're somebody who actually knows how to woodwork and have real skill, and you want to do this, I'd highly recommend carving the chain instead of doing what I did, as if I'd carved into the wood, the chain wouldn't be in pieces and would be super strong. But because I don't have much time or abilities, I did it this way, which isn't the strongest way, but we'll see. Once the glue had dried, I just wanted to give it a quick varnish before giving it a spin. The varnish made the wood look a lot better, richer in colour, and it also gave it a bit more grip. At first the chains were a little bit stuck together, I made them nice and loose, and they flowed just like a real chain. I don't know if it's just because I was the one who made this, but something about a wooden chain just looks awesome. It's not something you see every day, and it kind of looks out of place, but in a good way. One fear I had about the wooden chain is it wouldn't be able to move as nice as a metal one, as the metal ones also have ball bearings. But honestly, I didn't really notice a difference. When I held it next to the real nunchucks, I was actually quite surprised. They weren't only the same size, but it was also the same colour. It was a total accident, but a nice one. Anyway, the real question is, will they spin as well as the real ones? They won't, but will they hold up? And that's the question I didn't want to answer. I really liked these and I didn't want to risk breaking them. After a quick spin, I was actually quite shocked. They held up surprisingly well. It gave me the confidence to keep on trying. The more I used them, the more confident I got, until this happened. No! The chain broke in 2 spots. The first way it broke surprised me because a piece actually snapped, while the other spot, it was just where the links connected. I kind of expected that to break. This is a problem that's easily solved with Gorilla Glue. As for the rest of the nunchucks, they held up completely fine. But I had enough of working on these and it was time to move on to the last build, and that's going to be the axe. So in the past I've made one other axe before, but that was a fantasy axe and it was made of resin. You can check out the video here. This time I want my axe to look more real. Starting with the head of the axe, my first step is to prepare the wood. I cut 2 pieces to about the same length and I'm going to glue them together because the wood isn't thick enough yet. By gluing it together, it'll make it thicker. I spread the glue evenly and clamped it super tight. I left it to dry for 48 hours. Probably only needed 24, but I wanted to be sure. While that was drying, I got to work on the handle. Originally I was going to copy the handle design of my fantasy axe, but that axe's handle is super bendy and doesn't really work on a real axe. So instead, I'm going to base it off my real axe, which is a much straighter handle. Also ignore the rust, my axe has seen better days. I cut the wood to the right length and busted out the grinder once again to sand away everything I didn't need. And yeah, it made a mess. Honestly, I think I spent more time cleaning up the wood chips than I actually did making the handle. Once I got the rough shape, I then smoothed out the edges and made it round. Now when I hold this one, it slides my hand a lot nicer than the fantasy axe. Now I purposely left the end untouched for now. I wanted to make the axe head first. With the glue fully dried and the handle ready, I moved on to the axe head. I decided to go with the same shape as the real axe as I tried drawing one, and it looked horrible. I'm no artist. Cutting it out was pretty tricky too. The jigsaw barely made it through the thickness, and I had to do it very slowly. But one cool thing I hadn't even thought about was how the wood grain would run. Luckily, it ran forward to the center, and I know it's going to look amazing when it's done. Before starting the shaping, I needed to cut the hole in the handle. I used a spade drill piece to slowly remove the wood. But here's where I messed up. I wasn't holding the piece straight, and when I drilled through it, I noticed the hole ended up slightly off. And I already made a mistake earlier cutting the shape, so I was really debating just restarting. But since I'd have to wait 48 hours for the glue to dry, I figured I may as well just try and fix it. The next step was actually going back to the handle. I had to sand away the untouched end to make it fit into the axe head. It took some trial and error, but eventually I got it right. I just had to finish shaping the axe head, fix those little mistakes as best I could. And honestly, I'm glad I didn't restart. I think I did a pretty good job. It's not perfect, but way better than I thought I'd be able to get it. Sliding the head onto the axe handle, it gave me a good preview of how that's going to look. Just before joining the pieces together, I trimmed off the top of the handle as it was a bit too long. Now normally when attaching an axe head to the axe handle, you'd hammer in a wedge onto the top and lock it in, like on my real axe just here. But that would 100% split wood, and I didn't want to risk it, especially since there was already a slight split on the end. So instead I decided that I'd do the same thing that I did with the nunchucks. I'm going to use pegs. I found a perfect drill bit for a tight fit and drilled into the axe handle. It was such a tight fit I decided I wouldn't need the glue. It was really hard to get the peg in and I knew it was going to hold it tight. Originally I was going to put a second hole, but I decided best not to. I grabbed a scrap bit of wood and used that as a hammer, and trust me, it's not coming out. I cut off the excess peg, gave it a final sand over until it was flush with the surface, and the axe is done. Just like the last 2 builds, there was only one thing left to do, and that was just to varnish it and leave it to dry. When it comes to varnishing this one, the grain will really pop out and look even better when it's dried, so I'm really excited to see how it turns out. The varnish pretty much protects it like a wood oil, but it also adds colour, making it look a little nicer. It only needed 1 coat, and I left it to dry. Out of the 3 things I made, this one is definitely my favourite. The wood grain really made this project stand out, and I'm super happy with how it turned out. Of course, this build isn't perfect. There are things I wish I did better. There are things I wish I did differently, such as where the handle meets the head. I wish it was a little bit thicker there, and I also wish I didn't make those mistakes when making the head itself. Oh, and the varnish also sealed a split on the back of the axe head. Holding it side by side with the real axe, first thing I noticed was the weight difference. The wood one is way lighter. I guess that's probably because I used the lightest wood I could find, and there's no metal. Second thing I noticed was the thickness. Mine was way thicker, but honestly, I like the width of it. The wooden one also ended up a little shorter, but it's not too noticeable. So next time I need to chop firewood, you know I'll be reaching for my new axe. I mean, that's if it actually works. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you subscribe, and a huge thank you for helping me reach 1,000 subs. I seriously appreciate it, and thanks for watching.